You cover the entire Clinton scandal. Where are we at this moment, and what exactly is this process called impeachment?
Well, impeachment is a complicated and a long process. It's at least 4 steps. The first step is the House Judiciary Committee has to draw up and then debate and approve articles of impeachment. They send it. The second step is to the House of Representatives. The House itself votes to impeach a president. So if the House votes to impeach, then it goes to the next step, which is a trial in the Senate. And so the House and the Senate both have authority, and the Senate votes to convict or acquit. In the last 2 impeachment cases, Richard Nixon was voted. The articles of impeachment were voted in the House Judiciary Committee, and he resigned because he knew he would be impeached and removed from office. In the case of Bill Clinton, he was impeached by the House of Representatives, but the Senate voted to acquit him. And they basically went through the exercise. They knew from the beginning there were not going to be enough votes, but they wanted to do it as a matter of principle or as a matter of politics.
Where are we at this moment?
At this moment, we're not even at step 1. And I would say that it's almost impossible for Donald Trump to be impeached as long as Republicans are in control of Congress. No party has ever impeached a president of the same party. And there's no inclination of the Republican leaders to impeach Trump. So right now, we're at the point where there is an FBI investigation, and there is investigations by the Senate Intelligence Committee and the House Government Oversight Committee.
Mm-hmm. Laura, what is your take on the situation? Do you think it is unlikely, well, maybe it is unlikely at this moment, but do you think in the long run it is still unlikely for Trump to be impeached?
Well, Xin, I agree with Rick. This is much farther down the road. Some congressmen and women like to say, oh, we need to impeach the president, and it gets them a boost in the polls or maybe some good ratings. But right now, because the Republicans have the control of the House and the Senate, that's very unlikely. Now, the cases which it could happen is as the special prosecutor unfolds their investigation from the Justice Department, the FBI, and the House and Senate committees. Well, then, if that approval rating for Republicans goes down lower, and in the next midterms coming up in 2018, they are in risk of losing the House, losing the majority in the Senate. And if that happens, and that would sort of line up with the time after the other investigations are completed, then I could see a real threat for impeachment. But that's not until 2018 and not until the outcomes of these other investigations are complete.
Professor Whittington, you said earlier that we are in presidential impeachment territory if Comey's memo does exist, and it would be very damaging to the president. Now, Comey has agreed to testify at a hearing by the House Oversight Committee on the circumstances surrounding his termination. Would Comey's memo or his testimony offer enough evidence to charge President Trump of obstruction of justice or quicken the pace of any impeachment cases?
I don't think by itself it'll be enough, but there's sort of a continuing set of stories coming out revealing new actions and different actions that the Trump administration has taken, that President Trump himself have taken, that bolsters the kinds of concerns people have over the Comey memo. So we're still early in the process. We're still trying to figure out exactly what happened. There's lots of opportunities for the administration to put a better spin on it. But I think it's conceivable that if Republican voters, for example, turn against Trump ultimately, that even Republican congressmen would eventually turn against him as well.
Now, Laura, Committee Chairman Representative Jason Chaffetz has tweeted that the hearing has now been postponed with no future date because Comey wants to speak first with Robert Mueller, the newly appointed special counsel investigating possible Russian meddling of the 2016 election. What's behind the postponement? What difference would that make?
Well, Bob Mueller has made it very clear that as the special prosecutor, he is taking the lead on this. He's taking the lead on collection of documents and interviews prior to the Senate and the House committees. And so Bob Mueller, who's very well respected across both party lines in Washington, has already been at the FBI to collect information, especially about the memos that James Comey seems to have written after some very difficult meetings with the president, where he felt that the president was trying to get him to drop the case against Michael Flynn and others. So Bob Mueller's already looked at those memos. He obviously wants to speak with James Comey Comey before James Comey goes up before the committee. And so it actually is, now that we have a special prosecutor, really the right order in which for James Comey to effectively tell his side, and for Bob Mueller, who's investigating the obstruction of justice, to really get the facts straight.
Right now, we seem to have several gates, let's say several cases inside. For instance, we have the possible collusion with the Russians, we have the firing of Comey and the intention behind the firing of Comey, and we have the leaking of classified information to the Russians. Rick, which one of these would be the most possible, the strongest case that could inflict real damage to Trump's administration?
Well, at this point, obstruction of justice is the one that's most difficult for him, because he effectively has said in TV interviews that he got rid of Comey because he wanted to make Russia go away. And also Comey, according to leaked stories, has said effectively that Trump tried to obstruct the investigation, which would be obstruction of justice. Now, the one that would be the most damaging is the underlying charges, not the cover-up of the Russian meddling in the election, but if Donald Trump was aware and tried to get the Russians to intervene in an American election in 2016. If there is some evidence to the underlying charges, then that could even be an issue of treason, which would definitely be a high crime or misdemeanor impeachable offense.
Mm-hmm. Professor Whittington, now President Trump has been mired in scandals involving the Russians even before he took office, and the liberal media has spared no efforts to take him down. What's behind the feud between these two in your eyes?
Well, the Trump administration is behaving in unusual ways. They're not as experienced in handling politics and negotiating with other members of Congress and other parts of the executive branch as past presidential administrations have been. So in part they're stumbling around and making difficulties for themselves that other kinds of administrations with more experience probably wouldn't do. There's also policy disagreements, of course, between the Trump administration and even between the Republicans in Congress, but certainly between the Trump administration and Democrats in Congress, and that creates a lot of underlying political hostility.
Well, is that a reason really to go after him relentlessly because of his lack of experience? I mean, there's not even a chance, it seems, that that's been given to Trump to do his job, Professor Whittington.
No, I think if it was just an experience, then it wouldn't. I think the problem of his inexperience in this particular context is that the administration is willing to say things, for example, to the FBI director that other administrations would just be sophisticated enough not to try to do, that they're much less sophisticated in how they want to deal with, for example, as reported last night, the Central Intelligence Agency, and whether or not to get them involved in this investigation as well. I think other administrations would be much more careful about how they're handling those kinds of queries, and they'd be much more organized about how they present that information to the general public and to the media, and this administration just has not been very good at doing that.
You have been, Laura, you worked as an advisor to President Clinton. Is it normal for you to hear that so much have leaked out of the White House? How is this possible? This is really particular this time?
Well, it is very interesting, especially since we're in the first 4 months of the administration, Shin. You know, right now the White House is not staffed to the full level yet, which is very odd. And there is not a lot of those that have been around it before. You've got a lot of family members in there that don't have the political due diligence that other, not career politicians, but government and policy experts do have. You know, like my colleague was just saying, there's no reason for President Trump to think that he can reach out to the director of intelligence and the NSA and the FBI and say, hey, love for you to put this away and not investigate Mike Flynn, or this Russia mess is just a mess, nothing else. It just is not politics as normal. Now, politics as normal is something that, you know, his group of hardcore voters voted against. They don't want politics as normal. But there's a big difference between unforced errors and surrounding yourself with people that cannot say no to you, cannot put you in the right direction. And you know what, Xin? Now they're being put at risk because they're spreading falsehoods. They can't trust their president on the inside. And all of a sudden now you've got younger staffers that may have to lawyer up to be ready for an investigation into their part of whether it's collusion or disseminating false information.
Well, very quickly, Rick, what is your take on the feud between the liberal media and President Trump?
Well, it's clear he's getting bad press. There was a study, 80% of coverage of President Trump has been negative, 93% on CNN and NBC, the two most watched networks, at least in the past couple of weeks. And so there's no question he's getting negative coverage. Is it unfair? That's for us to debate. It may be true and negative. He says it's fake news, but the ratings are as high as they've ever been. The Washington Post, New York Times are selling more online copies than they've ever done.
Well, thank you very much, all of you. Rick Dunham, former president of the National Press Club, and Laura Schwartz, a former advisor to President Clinton, and Professor Keith Whittington of Princeton University. Thank you very much. And here is my first point. Although it's too early to tell whether an impeachment will actually take place, Trump has already set a record by having such a discussion so early into his presidency. And it's not a surprise. Trump was elected as the president for the divided states of America. The polarization of the American people, plus ever more entrenched partisan politics, makes today's scenario inevitable. It's foreseeable that this saga will drag on, and the liberal media will not relent in their pursuit to delegitimize Trump's presidency.